15% would go ahead on the 1st of May. And that was merely a week ago today. And in that replying affidavit, it's a thick wad of paper which is over here, the minister says the VAT rate is therefore set to increase to 15.5% on the 1st of May. That was the culmination of a long argument as to why it was necessary and why it was unavoidable. And then he says the process to pass this type of legislation contemplated in 7.4 is already underway. On the 12th of March, I published the draft rates and monetary amounts and amendment of revenue laws bill. A copy of the draft bill is attached, where he shows that they will give permanent legislative effect to the new VAT rate of 15.5%. Now, this was 1 week ago, a categorical answer in his affidavit to our court case. And so there he said there was no alternative to the VAT increase. And late last night, our lawyers were saying to me, the minister wants to reach an out-of-court settlement. Now, what happened between last Thursday and yesterday, which was Wednesday? What happened was the DA's challenge, which was heard in court on Tuesday. And that day was absolutely pivotal because our excellent legal team made the case as to why the VAT increase should be interdicted and why the minister had made the announcement in terms of an unconstitutional power allocated to him under the VAT Act. And secondly, why the process by which the Finance Portfolio Committee had supposedly adopted the fiscal framework when that proposal was actually never before the committee, and why an unlawful outcome and irrational outcome of the Finance Portfolio Committee had landed before Parliament as a whole, which adopted a fiscal framework that had unprocedurally and unlawfully and irrationally emerged out of the Portfolio Committee and the Standing Committee in the NCOP. The arguments were so clearly framed that I have no doubt that the minister's legal team went back to him on Wednesday after our court case and will be set aside by the court. And in that context, it seemed better for the minister to concede before he was perceived to have been forced to by the outcome of the DA's court challenge. And that is what has clearly happened in the last week. Now, it's also crucial from the DA's perspective that we set out these circumstances because there's no doubt that the minister, in trying to save face, will seek to present this as the result of his discussions with the smaller parties. The issue that the ANC fears more than anything else is that the public will come to understand the extent of the DA's muscle in holding the balance of power and the impact that we can make both through the political process and then the legal process if the political process proves impermeable as it did this time. And so the minister needs to somehow save face by saying, I'm making this concession and I'm doing it after the consultations with the smaller parties. And obviously the smaller parties will want to claim some credit in having negotiated their way out of a VAT increase. That argument obviously cannot hold water because a lot of negotiations had happened supposedly with the smaller parties before last Thursday. And yet last Thursday, the minister categorically said that the VAT increase would go ahead and that there was indeed no alternative to it, and that the Rates Act, as it's called in its abbreviated form, would be passed and would make provision for the 0.5% VAT increase. So it was clear that the DA's court intervention was the pivotal intervening factor that has enabled the people of South Africa to come out victorious and to show them why their vote really mattered. It is crucially important for us to hold the balance of power at the will of the voters so that we can win battles not by grace and favor of kind concessions by the ANC, but because we have the numbers in Parliament and we have the muscle in the courts and the arguments in the courts to stand up for the public who make it possible for us. This is the victory of all South African taxpayers. We'd like to thank you all for coming into this fight shoulder to shoulder with us. We'd like to thank you in your thousands for having signed our petitions and stood with us in this battle. And we will continue to fight for all South Africans, especially the poor and the marginalized, in seeking economic growth, in seeking job creation, and in seeking responsible public spending so that the government does not keep on raising your taxes to fund unlawful expenditure, corruption, and sheer waste. And so the DA will now be pushing very hard for the necessary spending review. Long before this process began, we made proposals to the national government on how we could dramatically save money in the current budget to avert and prevent an increase in any form of taxation. The minister refused to listen to this. He kept on making it an issue about cutting frontline services when all the savings that the DA had proposed avoided cutting the crucial frontline services. We want to cut waste. That's what we want to do. And we want to cut corrupt and fruitless expenditure. And that is what our spending review seeks to achieve, which will include obviously a review of all the ghost workers in the state to save many millions of rands that is costing the taxpayer at the moment. So there's going to have to be a spending review. We're going to have to look at where we can cut waste, not frontline services, and where we can protect the poor, especially, from any increase in taxation that makes them have to choose between putting food on the table or putting their children into school because no longer are the VAT increases affordable. For many, they are already unaffordable. But this whole issue has not yet ended, and I do want to say there is still quite a battle to be run from this point on. Because if you look at the minister's statement issued in the early hours of this morning, it says the Minister of Finance will shortly introduce the rates and monetary amounts and the Amendment of Revenue Laws Bill, which proposes to maintain the value-added tax rate at 15%. In his court papers last week, he said 15.5%. Now he's saying 15%, which shows that he's clearly backed down from the 1st of May 2025. Then he says he's doing that instead of the proposed increase to VAT announced in the budget in March. So he says he will still introduce this this bill, and it will be different from the one he announced in March. So he says he plans to do this, and we have concluded that that means he will do it, but there is still a gap between the intention and the result, and we have to bear that very much in mind. He says the decision to forego the increase follows extensive consultations with political parties. What he critically fails to mention is that it follows the DA's court case on Tuesday, and then suddenly on Wednesday we had this change of heart. So we are now expecting from the minister's lawyers a settlement proposal, a formal settlement proposal. We will respond to that settlement proposal through our own lawyers. And if we can reach agreement, including on the issue of costs, we will seek to have that agreement made an order of court. There is a second crucial issue that comes into play here, and that is what Parliament will do around the Portfolio Committee's acceptance of the fiscal framework, or recorded acceptance of the fiscal framework, because indeed it was never put to the Portfolio Committee. And secondly, what we are going to do about Parliament's adoption of the fiscal framework that they assumed had come from the Portfolio Committee. Now, there's no precedent that we know of how that can be set aside. We believe there are two ways. One, that a court can set aside Parliament's acceptance of the fiscal framework if it was unlawful and irrational in reaching that conclusion. And on the other hand, the Speaker can reconvene Parliament to review and rescind that decision. We don't know which path will be followed at this stage. But because there were two respondents, at least in our case, SARS was the third respondent, but there were two main respondents in our case. Number one, the Minister and obviously the Department of Finance, and two, Parliament. We have to seek a settlement agreement with both before we can say that we have beaten this VAT increase. So it's important for us to say that while victory is a nose length away, we still have to cross the finishing line. And it ain't over till it's over. So we will continue fighting. We will continue negotiating a settlement through our lawyers with the Minister's legal team and hopefully with Parliament's legal team as well. So this is a complex issue. We have fought every step of the way, and we hope that we have broken it down for you in simple steps that is clear for a layperson to understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will now hand over to Karabo to handle all the questions. Thanks, Karabo.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Mamazela. Colleagues, now as a standard protocol, we're going to open up for a round of questions. You introduce yourself, the media house that you are representing, and then to whom you're posing your questions. I see there's eagerness. I see there's already two hands this side. I'll start this side. Let me cross-check this side. Are we good? All right. First you. Paul, you go first.
Good morning. Paul Dekiase from Bloomberg. Just this out-of-court settlement, so what did the Minister actually ask from the DA to do? So if he said he was going to give up the VAT increase, in response, what did he want the DA to actually do? And then secondly, where to now for the Government of National Unity? Once this is done, do you just carry on as normal, or do you go back and actually renegotiate the original letter of intent, or how do you go forward from there with the GNU? Thank you.
Thank you. Second question.
Dennis Daaport from Netwerk 24. Helen, man, ek wil net by jou hoor, wil die DA hê na hierdie hele verwikkeling nou dat die minister van Finansies Enoch Godongwana moet bedank weens hierdie groot begrotingskrisis, en tweedens net om aan te sluit by my kollega Paul se vraag. Die ANC gaan later vandag 'n media-konferensie hou met die kleiner partye wat saam met hulle gestem het vir daai fiskale begroting. Nou die DA en die Vryheidsfront Plus, wat dan nou RNE-vennote is nie deel van daardie vergadering nie. Jy het self vroeër nou gesê dat die ANC gaan dit heel moontlik wil laat lyk asof hierdie uitkoms nou deel was van 'n proses wat hulle met hierdie kleiner partye gevolg het. Hoe beïnvloed dit julle deelname in die RNE? Ons weet julle het gesê dat julle gaan wil deel bly van die RNE, maar maak hierdie nuwe verwikkeling nou julle standpunt anders te daar rondom, dankie.
All right, thank you. Should I take one more hand? Okay, I'll take yours. I'll come back to you in second round, Babala.
Hi, I'm Victoria here from the Daily Maverick. Just on the settlement, how does it affect, if at all, the DA's Part B of its court case? Will that continue to be pursued?
Okay, thank you so much. Mamazela, will you take all three? SABC. There we go. Right.
All right. Part B of our court case, let me just answer Victoria's question first. Part B of our court case seeks to have Section 7.4 of the VAT Act declared unconstitutional because it gives a power to the minister that only Parliament should have. Only Parliament is empowered to raise taxes under our Constitution. That is a power that cannot be delegated to a minister, and 7.4 unconstitutionally does delegate that power to the minister. So we will continue with Part B of our application. Then to start with Paul's question, we have yet to receive a formal written settlement offer from the minister. The minute we see what is in a formal written settlement offer, we will know what he is asking and what he expects the DA to do. What we will not do is withdraw Part B of our application, because it is a very important point to get an order of court stating that only Parliament can raise taxes. So that's important. But we will wait to see what the Minister is proposing before we give any categorical answer on how we will respond to it. As I say, we are anticipating this, but we are still a nose lengths away from the finishing line. Then the question is, what next for the GNU? As people probably have noticed by now, we have a very strange coalition government. There's no precedent for what goes down in South Africa's coalition government anywhere in the world. No other coalition government in a country that has a proportional representation system would have survived what this coalition government so far has survived. For example, the ANC ignores the statement of intent every day. It pushes ahead with very major proposals, including this VAT increase, without seeking to get sufficient consensus with its major coalition partner. When we've made it clear we're not going to support it, the ANC goes to parties outside of the coalition to see if they can win a majority to get through the Portfolio Committee and to get through Parliament. And in fact, they did, but by what were clearly very devious means, by making the smaller party believe that they were going to withdraw the 0.5% VAT increase, when in fact, after that promise, the minister's own affidavit to a court, which I've read earlier, made it very clear they were not going to withdraw the 0.5% VAT increase. So it was clearly a question of deceiving the smaller parties that are outside the coalition to get their vote to pass this VAT increase. And so the deception all around is quite mind-boggling. And in most coalitions anywhere in the world, that level of undermining would be fatal to any coalition. In South Africa, we have to have thicker skins than normal. We have to expect the unexpected. We have to pave ways in contexts which don't even exist in other societies. It is not my position to say whether or under what circumstances the GNU should continue. What was at question was whether it should continue after what the ANC did in negotiating with parties outside of the coalition during the votes on the fiscal framework in the Portfolio Committee and in Parliament. And that was a major question. But we decided that we would still win this round, as our court case indicated we were set to do, which is what has forced the minister to want to negotiate a settlement now. So what the future is going to be for the GNU is something that I cannot categorically answer now. A lot will depend on what happens today. There's no doubt that the ANC and the smaller parties will be holding a press conference to triumph the championing of these kinds of discussions and negotiations, as if that is what led to the minister backing down when last week he said he categorically wasn't going to do so. And that also raises the question. We were set to meet the ANC this morning in Johannesburg at 11. Just before midnight last night, I got a notification from Fikile Mbalula that the meeting today at 11 that was scheduled in Johannesburg had been cancelled at short notice, and then that the minister and the ANC were going to be holding a press conference with smaller parties outside the GNU. Now that in itself is extraordinary. It is simply extraordinary. There's no other way to frame it. What we have been asking for since the very beginning of the mooted VAT increase is now coming to pass. The minister has conceded that we were right in our arguments from the beginning, and yet he seeks to undermine his major coalition partner by holding a press conference with parties outside the coalition to claim victory on a point that we have been fighting for since the very beginning. And to claim victory on a point that they did not support when the vote came to the Portfolio Committee or to Parliament, they in fact supported the VAT increase. So you cannot put all of these ironies into one coherent political space. It is one contradiction after another. And most certainly, depending on what comes out of the press conference today, we are now scheduled to have the meeting with the ANC tomorrow, and I have no doubt that all of these developments will be on the agenda. Moet Gorongwana bedank. Ek kan nie dink aan 'n groot verleentheid wat 'n minister van Finansies moet deurmaak as om voet by stuk te hou oor 'n verhoging in BTW om dan op die laaste nippertjie te moet terugtrek deur die advies van sy regsverteenwoordigers. En dis presies wat hier gebeur. So hy is teruggedruk deur die oppositie van die DA se kant as ook van sy regsadviseur se kant wat definitief hom aangeraai het dat hy geen kans het om hierdie hofsaak te wen nie. Dit is 'n baie groot terugslag en hy het uit die staanspoor uit daarop aangedring dat BTW moet verhoog word en ek dink daar gaan groot druk op minister Gorongwana wees ook uit die ANC se kant dat hy dalk sal moet bedank. Okay, sure. I always try and answer the question in the language that was asked, but that's fine. What I'm saying is that there can't be a greater embarrassment for a finance minister than to have been so adamant that a VAT increase was essential, to have repeated that in his court papers a week ago, to have refused to buckle to any pressure or any negotiations or any advice from anybody, and then now suddenly to have to back down in the face of clear advice by his lawyers that he was unlikely to win the case in court, and to avoid the humiliation of an adverse court order, rather to offer to settle before that happens. That in itself is a massive embarrassment for the finance minister, and certainly in a normal democracy, a finance minister wouldn't survive that, but as I have said, in South Africa nothing is normal, and certainly coalition politics is not your common garden variety coalition that you get internationally. Sorry. Hold on, Mama.
Taking a
No.
pause to continue your
I never
question.
knows actually when one has had no sleep.
Okay, I'll take the next round. I see there's one. Is there any other hand apart from this one? Okay, I see a follow-up, 2 more. Okay, 5. Okay, so we'll start here. 1, 2, 3, 4, newsroom, and then the follow-up for Netwerk would be number 5.
Thank you. Good morning. Babalo here from EWN. I just saw the ANC caucus statement that says the impasse was underscored the need for a more transparent and inclusive approach on matters of national expenditure. They seem to be in agreement with a lot of people that have criticized the process leading up to the announcement. What's the ideal budget approach in your view? If you could just sketch it out for us briefly, how should it start and how should it end? And you had an unlikely ally in the EFF earlier this week in court. Can you say that it was only the DA really and the EFF that really took up this fight by going to court, or can other parties, like can Action SA, for example, lay claim to any victory in this regard? And should the minister really step down? Can you say that outright? Thank you.
Okay.
Celine from SABC. I would want to find out what are the talks like in those meetings, especially after the fiscal framework has gone through Parliament. It can't be pleasant between the DA and the ANC at the moment. So could you maybe give us some insight into that?
Okay, pass on the mic next to you.
It's Arthur from Heart FM. First, one question. I just want to find out, the first question is, has the Minister or National Treasurer give you a time frame when are they going to come back and share with you the out-of-court settlement? The second question, I just want to find out, you said that the meeting has been postponed until tomorrow with the ANC. Are you going to attend that meeting? Yeah.
Okay. Netwerk, follow up.
And just a follow-up question, Dennis Dalport from Netwerk 24. Ellen, die ERV het onlangs 'n verslag uitgereik waarin dit duidelik was dat die DA nou die grootste party in die land is. Hy het omtrent so 30% van steun teenoor die ANC se 29%. Dink jy hierdie kwessie rondom die begroting kan die DA se steun nou nog verder laat toeneem terwyl die ANC se steun verder sal daal, en is die DA gereed om die meerderheid te party in die land te word? Dankie.
Okay, last one, newsroom. Then I'm closing it, colleagues. I'm giving you one more opportunity for a hand. Okay, sold.
Thank you very much, Valen, from Newsroom Africa. I suppose it does tether on to what Netfact 24 was also asking. In the court case, we heard what a small percentage was expected to actually come from this anticipated VAT hike, a small percentage of the budget in the greater scheme of things. If the GNU's ructions separate even further because of this, would this be a battle won but a war lost, perhaps, for the DA?
Okay, cool. Got all that? Cool. Okay. Right. So you'll take them, I'll come back and wrap up.
Right. Okay, let's hope I've got all of that. If you read the EFF's court papers, they primarily add to ours by arguing that the support of the smaller parties in the Portfolio Committee and in Parliament was based on a deliberate deception. That the ANC had deliberately deceived the smaller parties into believing that they would be prepared to drop the 0.5% VAT increase when that was never their intention. And in fact, the EFF points to the fact that the minister had insisted that the 0.5% VAT increase continue in his replying affidavit last Thursday, and yet the smaller parties had voted for the fiscal framework in the Portfolio Committee and in Parliament on the express understanding that they believed the minister would reconsider it. And on that basis, the EFF argued that there was a clear deception which was an unlawful exercise of public power. That was the EFF's case. And I think it was a very important argument because it continues to expose how the ANC deals with its partners in whatever forum. Now, these weren't their partners in the Government of National Unity, or not entirely. Obviously, the PA was there, and the IFP and a couple of other parties also agreed to support the fiscal framework, and they are in the Government of National Unity, but also parties that are not in the Government of National Unity. And it's important that this level of deception, which happens repeatedly, is also exposed to the voting public of South Africa, because coalitions are based on a foundation of mutual trust. And the big problem is we have to operate in a very low trust environment. There's very low trust environment inside the ANC, but that also makes a trust environment between the ANC and its coalition partners very, very difficult to establish. And the EFF's papers make it very clear as to why there's a low trust environment, because people get deliberately duped and then take decisions on the basis of misinformation that then turns out not to be the case. And so that was an important contribution by the EFF to this particular case. We were arguing the constitutional arguments primarily. They were arguing the deliberate misinformation and misleading argument, and that being an unlawful exercise of public power. So those two arguments dovetailed well, and that is why they joined our case. Now, can Action South Africa lay claim to a victory? Well, they no doubt will try, and they will no doubt be helped by the ANC to do that sometime this morning, later on this morning, which is, I'm sure, the purpose of this press conference they're having, or at least one of the purposes. But then they will have to answer the question, why did all their discussions, and almost all of them were before last Thursday, why did that have absolutely no impact on the position that the minister laid before the court? That the VAT increase was going ahead and that it would be in the rates bill and that it would be effective from May the 1st. That is what the minister makes categorically clear last Thursday, after all his discussions had happened and after the misleading of the smaller parties had already happened in March before the vote on the fiscal framework. So it's going to be a very hard sell. And I'm sure journalists will ask some very pertinent questions around that claim. What are talks like in these meetings with the ANC? They're often surreal. I mean, they're often very cordial and very friendly and very polite and matter-of-fact and professional. The trouble is we're operating in a very low-trust environment. We've been given undertakings time and time again that have not materialized. And when I discuss that with some colleagues who have lots of experience of coalitions in Germany and in Denmark and in Holland and other places, they say to me that no coalition would survive in those contexts under the level of mistrust that inevitably has built up over the course of our negotiations and the course of this particular coalition government. So we have to always be very wary. Can we accept what the ANC is saying to us? The ANC is very, very wary never to write things down and never to get anything on paper, and certainly not to sign anything. And that is why you'll remember when we negotiated the statement of intent, there was a fight till after Judge Zondo had called for nominations for the president before we said we would vote for the president, because we said we would only vote if the statement of intent was signed by the duly authorized person in the form of the Secretary General of the ANC. They did sign it, but it still made very little difference. So that is the pure fact of the matter. There's a huge disconnect between what gets said in meetings and what gets done. That is the fact. And for us in the DA, who run very strictly in a high trust environment, because we have processes, we have the rule of our own laws and our own constitution, everyone can rely on each other sticking by those rules. That is what creates a high trust environment. And that is why the DA works. It's a completely novel thing for us to be in a relationship characterized by a low trust environment. And that is profoundly different from any other coalition circumstance anywhere else in the world, and makes predicting what's going to happen from one day to the next very difficult. And it also makes it very difficult to determine in the course of these meetings what we can take seriously and what the ANC will simply ignore when it suits it. Right, then, will we attend the meeting with the ANC tomorrow? I suppose we will. You know, we don't know what's going to come out of today's meeting. Anything can come out of today's meeting with the smaller parties. I mean, you know, I'm sure many of them would like to be in the coalition government. So let's see if the ANC is going to do something unilateral there. We never know what's going to happen. We never know what's going to happen. So this is the consequence of what I have just described as a low trust environment. We will assess the situation after the meeting has happened, and then we will go ahead. But normally we are open to having meetings. We prefer to tell the ANC exactly what we think of a situation, exactly where we stand in a situation, and we prefer to play open cards. And that is what we will usually intend to do. But I can't say we will definitely go tomorrow, because it also depends on what happens today and where we are with the negotiations around the settlement and where we are in relation to the coalition as a whole. The South African Institute of Race Relations poll that measured the DA as the biggest party in South Africa at a particular point in time. Let me stress that a poll is not a prediction. And we are used to fluctuations in the poll depending on the context and the environment. And yes, all South Africans have responded very positively to the DA's fight in this matter. And all thanks go to the voters for standing up and giving us the muscle and the voice that we needed to stop this VAT increase. So I think people are beginning to understand, and this is the crucial thing, that their vote really impacts on their life. And that if they want their life to improve, they need to vote for a party that fights for them, and the DA will fight for them at those critical moments. And once that perception runs deep in the South African population, people will be able to switch their vote without being rooted in the identity politics of the past, because the issues will become the issue and people will increasingly vote on the issues to improve their lives. So this has been a pivotal moment in South African politics because it has revealed to voters why their vote makes such a difference to the way they live. Then, in the court case, the election is separate. Yeah. Okay. Can I just answer the question of a battle lost and a war won? I will come to that, Babalo. I promise I'll come to that. Look, our battle in the GNU is to improve people's lives. And we especially want to improve the lives of the poor. That's what we want to do. And the most important thing for poor people is to get into a job. And so the critical thing is to grow the economy and to encourage investment. And every single thing we do in the GNU seeks to achieve that end, economic growth and jobs for the poor. And every fight we fight within that larger battle seeks to add to that outcome. So the last thing we want is for life to get more expensive for the poor while jobs are going down. That is why this fight was so crucial to win within the larger battle. So we do believe that we will win this fight when the settlement is finally concluded, but we only see this as a very small step in a much bigger battle. To grow the economy, to attract investment, to increase jobs, and to get many more South Africans working in dignified circumstances. Oh, Minister. Look, trouble is, if I say the Minister should resign, he definitely won't. So that is the problem. Look, the Minister let us know with very short time before the budget, it was about 12 days before the budget, that he was proposing a VAT increase and he wanted us to say yes. And we said, we will definitely not say yes. We will definitely say no. And he told us at the very last minute, and he didn't accept our response, and he didn't accept any of our offers on a spending review and how to cut expenditure and where it could be cut without affecting frontline services. And so now we've had to force him back through the courts. Now, this is a very important victory, but it shows you that in the political process, because the ANC has not yet accepted that they don't govern alone, we often hit a brick wall, because the ANC is used to governing in a situation where they say what has to happen and the rest of us have to go along with it. And that is what makes it very difficult to achieve out of the political process what we should achieve out of the political process in a normal coalition. So when we hit a brick wall in the political process, then we have to revert to the legal track. And the legal track was very clear and an open goal for us here. So what we couldn't succeed in the political process, we had to win through the legal process. Now, that alone should make a minister resign, because the minister says you don't negotiate a budget. I'm terribly sorry, but in a coalition, that's the first thing you negotiate is the budget. The very first thing you negotiate is the budget, because what is politics? Politics is about decisions of those elected into power as to how to spend the people's money and what priorities to give to the spending of that money. That is what politics is. And when you're in a coalition, the bigger party does not decide that on its own. And the minister has refused to recognize that fact and has fundamentally undermined the foundations of the coalition and acted contrary to every agreement that we've made up till now.
Now, colleagues, in wrap up, it's very important for us to remind ourselves around what this fight truly is about. When the Democratic Alliance entered the government of national unity, we made it very clear that our fight is not to dilute ourselves and become backups of the ANC. We did not suddenly wake up